wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
You're listening to A Quirky Journey, the Healthy Family podcast with your hosts Jo Whitten and Leah Follett. Welcome to A Quirky Journey. Join us as we share our family's journeys to good health. You'll find plenty of inspiration, tips and recipe ideas, as well as stories from everyday people who've struggled and overcome health problems and diet challenges in their own families. I'm Jo Whitten, author of the blog and book Quirky Cooking, and today I have with me two of my good friends. I've got Mary from Good Mood Food, and I've got Fuad from the food blog. Hello guys.
Hey, Jo.
Hi, Jo.
And we are going to be talking about parasites. So Mary has a bit of experience with this, and we have talked about it a little bit in a couple of podcasts with Mary before.
To clarify, we're not talking about parasites who are human parasites that are trying to leech off you in some way or anything like that.
No,
it's more the
annoying ones that get inside you.
There you go.
Yeah, okay, and make you ill.
Yeah, I'm pregnant at the moment, and I sometimes refer to my baby as a parasite. We're not talking about that.
Oh, congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
It's your third, is it?
It's my third, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And how long have you got to go?
I've got 9 weeks left.
Ooh.
Yes.
Wow.
Feeling rather large and hot and sweaty at the moment.
Yeah, just knackered.
In Brisbane? Is it really hot weather?
I know, I didn't plan it very well, you know.
Yeah.
Actually, we'll talk about parasites and the planning of the baby.
Okay, yes.
It's a segue, yeah.
That'll be good. Well, those of you who are listening to most of my podcasts, will probably remember Mary. So we've talked about her little boy who had FPIEs and anaphylactic allergies, and what else did he have? Goodness me.
What didn't he have is more...
Those long words that start with E.
Yeah, eosinophilic esophagitis.
That thing.
And he had sensory processing disorder. EGID. There were so many.
Yes. But anyway, after a couple of years of lots and lots of work, he's amazingly better. And if you want to hear the story of that, you need to go back to that podcast, which I will link to at the bottom. But what we want to get you to talk about today is your experience with parasites and your research and what you found helped, because I do get a lot of questions about this. People who want to know where you even start with the testing, and once you've found out you've got them, what do you do? And there's so many different ideas on it.
Yeah.
And we'd love to hear your story. So go ahead, and we'll interrupt with lots of questions.
Okay, sure. I'll start by saying one of the conclusions that people need to come to, and I think it's an individual conclusion, is whether parasites are the root cause of a problem or just part of a symptom of a leaky gut. Mm-hmm. We'll go into that in more detail. I think sometimes people get into the habit of into a position where they think that if they treat the parasites, all their health issues will resolve. Mm. But often the parasites are there for a very good reason, causing problems, but causing their own problems. Absolutely, they absolutely cause symptoms and problems. But a damaged gut microbiome invites them in for good reason.
Okay.
Is the point I was trying to make there. So when we decided we were going to do GAPS, it was because my son was so sick, and we knew that my husband had Giardia when he was in his early 20s, and it had taken him many, many years and many, many antibiotics to become symptom-free. But what we didn't realize at the time was that he was actually never free of Giardia. He almost certainly had it, and it never went away, but he resolved the symptoms. But what happened was about 10 years later, he started to develop adult onset food allergies, intolerances, and all sorts of things, which because we didn't know much at all about gut health and food, we never linked it back to the Giardia until we had been on GAPS for 18 months. Okay. So we went and we did GAPS, and I kept reading about parasites and on forums that I was on, but it was too much. It was too much for me. I just wanted to do GAPS, and I didn't want to think about details. We didn't do a lot of testing on anything. We just kind of assumed that if we did the gap stud, everything would come right. Mm-hmm. And to a large extent, that was absolutely true. So much stuff come right. But what we noticed was we noticed this throughout gaps, but we started to think we would test and treat parasites when after a year there were still some things that just wouldn't heal, and we'd hit a bit of a plateau, I suppose you'd say. Mm-hmm. And specifically, the things that we really noticed was behavioral stuff in the kids. Mm-hmm. And I had never, ever linked this to parasites, but I read a forum where very knowledgeable mothers, I just happened to read a post where they were talking about the following things that were all linked to parasite infestation in your gut. And they were biting your nails, walking on your toes, chewing your hair, so pica type things, eating things that your body isn't supposed to ingest, grinding your teeth when you're sleeping at night.
I remember hearing that one.
Yeah, and then also a wacky one was if your children's behavior goes off the rails around about full moon and new moon.
That's right. I remember you telling me that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah.
The full moon behaviorals, and there was good scientific reasoning for it. I realized. I thought it was just a hippie
Let me
thing,
guess.
you know.
Well, werewolves? No.
Yeah. Well, if you've heard the word lunatic, it comes from people whose behavior goes off the rails around the lunar cycle. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it turns out that if you have parasites in your gut, they come out to breed according to the cycle of the moon. So normally they hide within the mucus lining of your gut, and they don't cause too much disruption other than the things I mentioned earlier. But around full moon and new moon, when that is the trigger for them to come out of the mucus lining to breed, they disrupt your neuropathways, and they can actually cause behavioral responses to all of these, especially if you have an infestation, to these millions of parasites, basically disrupting the neuropathway that is established between your gut lining and your brain.
So Mary, you said you started noticing behavioral changes. So does that mean that before that the children were absolutely fine and like behaviorally, and then at some point you saw that change?
Not at all. They were always behaviorally mental around these periods, but I had never connected the dots. So I started to keep a diary, and I noticed that they would become very, very silly and loud and talk in strange voices, and as children do. But it was almost as if they had had too much sugar. Do you know how kids go a little bonkers? Mm. Yeah, we refer to it as a sugar high. They would be more tearful. My son would get far more. He would be angry one moment and then deliriously happy the next moment, and I had never linked it to any kind of pattern until I kept a diary and realized if both of them started to behave like that, I would go and I'd check the moon cycle, and it would almost always be within a couple of days of full moon or new moon. And then I had to laugh when I realized, and it took me a long time to convince my husband of it, but then I had to go back and show him the diary. I'm like, and yeah, we started to realize that it was, without even having done any tests, it was very clear that our kids had parasites. And that.
So how many months did you keep track of that, Mary?
Probably about 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah. But at the same time, there would also, around those moon cycles, we noticed that both the kids would get very itchy anuses. Uh-huh. Yeah, which is a strong sign of parasites, and that has to do with them laying eggs and breeding down in the colonic area. And the kids, it's a disgusting thing to talk about, but the children will scratch their bums and then they will bite their nails. Oh, and that's how the eggs get back into the gut.
Yeah.
So it is a cycle that the parasites cause these behavioral patterns in order to establish their life cycles.
So the scratching is justifiable in terms of like the physical, what's happening physically, but with the biting of the nails, was that from the neurology? Is it because the gut lining was somehow damaged and there was some kind of, is that what you think?
I don't think so. I think it's literally, I think it's exactly the the same mechanism as if you have a microbiome that is completely off balance. The pathogenic bacteria in your gut will establish the neuropathways with your brain instead of your gut lining establishing those neuropathways. It's almost like they get in the way. And they do that in order that they can control behavioral patterns, like they will get people to eat more sugar because that's what yeast needs to survive. It needs sugar and carbohydrates, and you hear about people having sugar cravings, carbohydrate cravings, and becoming addicted to those substances. That to me is a big red flag that someone has a yeast problem, because that is what yeast needs to survive. And it's as if yeast steps in the way. If you have a beautiful gut with perfect gut microbiome, then what tends to happen is your gut, the gut lining, they say the matter is very much like your brain matter. It's almost the same substance. And they talk about this gut-brain connection, and your immune system, which lives in your gut, will tell your brain through that gut lining what your body needs. So if you are vitamin D deficient, you will start to crave foods that are high in vitamin D. This is in a healthy gut. You see it very often in children. You know, if a child is lacking in certain minerals because they've been running around too much for the last 2 days, they will crave liquid or food that is high in magnesium or those minerals, and it'll just be a short craving, and that is a gut that is working beautifully in the way it communicates with your brain. But if the gut microbiome is messed up and there is and they are in the way, it's the only way to describe it. They've created the neuropathways instead of your gut lining creating that neuropathway, or instead of the good bacteria. Then you get the wrong messages to your brain, and your body starts to crave things or behave in certain ways or eat certain foods that actually do your body no good, but they keep the parasites alive or they keep the bacteria alive. And biting the nails is part of that, because the eggs get under the nails. And you bite the nails means that you eat the eggs and they come back and the life cycle continues.
Wow.
It's phenomenal when you really think about it, but that seemed to be the logic behind why these behaviors. Now, but then toe walking, people talk about toe walking being a clear sign of a child that has parasites. I have no idea why a parasite would need you to walk on your toes. Doesn't make any sense. No. But it seems to be a anecdotal link that many people have noticed, that their children who have parasites walk on their toes and don't walk with their whole foot. I can explain it.
I mean, it's not always a case of a clear direction, say, from the parasite causing that child to walk on their toes for some kind of reason. So sometimes a certain chemical that can be produced could have multiple effects. One of them is the desired effect for the propagation of the species, and the other one could be just a side effect that the brain picks up on and moves on. So it's not.
I agree. Yeah.
But that's really interesting with the toe walking. Is that a common thing, like children toe walk?
It's one of those things that you think. I have this saying. We have things that are normal and things that are common. And there are many, many things in society today that, because they are common, we have begun to believe that they are normal. Yeah? But they aren't. It's just that we have messed up so badly over the last 50 years. And one of those things is behavioral stuff like chewing hair, sucking 3 fingers in the mouth, biting nails, walking on toes. We see it all the time now. And I've never really even noticed it until I studied parasites. And I have friends whose kids walk on their toes, and now I go to their house and their kids walk past me, and I look at the dad and I say, your kids have parasites, you need to go get them tested. But I wouldn't have noticed it before I'd done any research on it. And it's like I say, my weirdometer's broken, but pretty sure I'm right.
Well, yeah, it's very interesting, because my daughter does that sometimes, but she's 5 years old and she wants to be a ballerina, and I'm not sure whether it's the parasites asking her to become a ballerina, or they have some kind of stardom aspirations. They want to be star parasites or something. I'm not really sure, but
well, Fuad, I would say that if that's her only symptom, then she probably doesn't have parasites. But if there are other red flags as well, then maybe get her tested.
Well, yeah, yesterday, like, she was biting her nails. I've never seen her do that really at all. But she bit her nail, and I was wondering why. Yeah, but she's been walking on her toes for a long time. But she's like superbly healthy, like yeah,
Yeah.
unbelievably healthy.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any symptoms from Sarah. So
No,
yeah.
and you don't want to get yourself in a position where you now are actually looking for symptoms with your children from a position of fear. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
if your children are beautifully healthy, that's just wonderful, and I'm so pleased for you. That's so wonderful. I love hearing about healthy kids because it's becoming less and less frequent. But what I would say is you're an intelligent guy, and if you notice that the nail biting becomes a problem, so she's biting her nails back to the quick on a regular basis, and perhaps they're becoming infected or sore, then you need to wonder why she would be doing that. And
Of course, yeah.
you can deal with it at the time, but I wouldn't certainly go looking for a problem where perhaps one doesn't exist.
I can't remember what we were talking about before we started that rabbit trail.
Oh yeah, sorry. We were talking
That's okay.
about how we got to treating our parasites.
Oh, yes.
So so after a year, I did the diary, and I took the. I could tell now that the kids had parasites, but I still they were still struggling a little bit with detox and healing, and I didn't want to go after parasites until I was sure that my kids were fairly symptom-free from gut trouble, because dealing with parasites is not necessarily a gentle thing. It can cause inflammation. You know, parasites are brilliant at mopping up toxins like heavy metals in our blood, which is why they're starting to believe that the gut, an unhealthy gut, invites parasites in to the body, is because they actually serve a purpose. A person with an unhealthy gut is generally very toxic. And so the body looks around and goes, well, what can I do to mop up toxins? Well, there's two things. Candida mops up toxins and parasites mop up toxins. So the body almost, and this is the point that I made at the very beginning, the body invites those parasites in because it doesn't know what else to do to deal with the toxicity issue. Yeah.
Yes, I've always thought of it as a move from symbiosis to dysbiosis, which is really what happens. So these parasites are symbiotic organisms, so they give us life and we give them life. And
Yes.
if everything is in a good balance, then the numbers are controlled, of like the parasitic numbers are controlled, and we get to live. And if something goes wrong, they can overgrow in numbers and cause us issues, which is
Exactly. And you have to look at what went wrong to cause them to overgrow. That's the interesting.
So they're not the root cause in and of themselves. The environment, you're saying, is what's actually caused them to reach those numbers. Yeah. Okay.
I'd say so. I'd say the environment has become such that the gut is leaky, toxins are escaping into the bloodstream, the liver is overloaded, and the parasites are there to help. They overgrow in order to help, because the backup detox mechanisms are overloaded, and so the parasite. But it doesn't help, because as long as your gut is leaky, even the parasites won't be able to mop up the toxins in a way that stops the behavioral disorders and the headaches and insomnia and all the things that come with toxicity.
So do you think that it's really important to heal the gut first before dealing with parasites?
I think absolutely. And I think a lot of people will go and they will do these tests and find out they have parasites, and they will be given the heavy course of 3 antibiotics, and they will treat the parasites, and the parasites will just come back because they were there for a reason.
Right.
And also, what you'll get is you'll destroy your microbiome. But one of the things that the parasites that are needed, they're needed to do some kind of function, and you'll kill those, and you'll kill any kind of straggling parasites that would be also usually responsible for the control of the entire microbiome itself. So
Absolutely.
You'll just wipe those off completely, and it's really a very
Vicious
bad
circle.
idea. Yeah.
It's even more. It's a downward spiral.
That's what I was just about to say.
Yeah.
It sounds like.
And the antibiotics really, so they should really be considered when the cases are extreme and someone needs some immediate help to turn them around. Is that what you imagine?
Yes, and I think that there's always a place for antibiotics. Antibiotics are so destructive to our gut microbiome, but they can save lives as well. And they can also, if you do it the right way, and if you know your gut microbiology, like you've done the really expensive biomed tests, you can use antibiotics in a way that really help you, but I don't believe it's possible to use antibiotics in a way that will help you unless you have the foundation of the right diet and the right probiotic foods that are going in at the same time. I think many people have done antibiotic treatments and thought they've solved one problem and just caused more problems. So they might even get rid of the parasites, but suddenly they end up with a leaky gut because they used the really hardcore antibiotics. And then they start with the insomnia or the gut dysbiosis or the irritable bowel, the bloating, and that.
And can that cause... I'm just thinking of a friend of mine who's having a lot of trouble with parasites and has done the big antibiotic thing and has a lot of gut pain, like tummy pain.
Yeah.
A lot of
inflammation.
Acidity. You know, where do you go if you've already done all that antibiotic stuff and you didn't heal the gut first? I guess you start over and start working on the gut before you do
never
anything
too late.
else. Yeah.
Yeah, you would go back I think, you know what, I was saying to my mother today, our society, our medical society, finds no benefit in people knowing the skills of root cause analysis. And the reason is because who's going to make money if everyone knows how to analyze the root cause of things? So you have people who go to the doctor, who get tested, they have parasites. No one ever asks the question, why do you have parasites? They just treat the parasites. It's really frustrating to me because you have all these highly intelligent people who must get very frustrated at just having to dish out pills rather than actually being allowed to use their brains in a way that helps them to figure out why that person got parasites in the first place, or why their cholesterol is high, or why, you know, they have type 2 diabetes. And if people were encouraged and if people were taught at a very young age how to go and look at where did this all start, what went wrong in my history, everyone would end up eating better.
Yeah.
You know, and resolving this and having a foundation of a good diet that doesn't feed this bad bacteria. And then the drugs would be useful.
I think antibiotics as a drug should really be one of those things that you require like 2 or 3 doctors to approve the administration. I don't think it's one of those things where, like, people are over-medicated in such a way that it just becomes ridiculous, and we're destroying people's health. Even though we give them some short-term gains, like maybe the symptoms of the parasite infection will go away, but then as things start settling back in and the effects of the antibiotics go away, I'd imagine the health will start getting worse and worse, and then they reach a point where the antibiotics no longer help.
I think that's where we're heading. I think we're heading to a place where it will be very difficult to get an antibiotic script as well.
Yeah.
So you were at a stage, Mary, that you'd healed the gut, but you're still struggling with too many of these parasites. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, we were struggling with symptoms that weren't healing. So we decided then I looked into the GAPS parasite protocol that she writes about, and the first time we tried anything, we were real gung-ho about it and didn't think too hard about it. And we started just putting oregano oil into the kids' foods. And oh my goodness, the die-off was so epic that I realized I needed to have a real good think about what we were going to do and plan a very gentle and long-term approach to dealing with parasites. So I read up a lot more about it.
What was the die-off like? Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Very interesting. Yeah.
It was epic. It was like bedridden stuff. It was, you know, it was a lot of brain fog and just lethargy and real. It was just too much. We went way too hard too early. And oregano oil is very similar to antibiotics. So I now realize that it's the last thing you try, not the first thing you try. But I was like that.
How much were you using? Were you like giving them spoonfuls of the stuff?
No,
or like,
drops. Just drops of it.
Yeah.
And it's so potent.
It is.
And so what I did was something happened in the middle of all of this, and it had to do with baby making. I had this is where the baby parasite comes into the whole story.
Okay.
It started off very sad. I had a miscarriage, and the miscarriage at about 7 weeks, and I I went from weighing about 67 kilograms to 77 kilograms over the course of a month after
Wow.
I miscarried. And at that time I was fasting. I was just trying to do stage 1, stage 2, and there was nothing I could do. The weight was coming it didn't matter what I ate. And I think my thyroid was deeply impacted by the miscarriage.
Can I ask why you were fasting?
I was fasting to try not to put on weight, to be honest.
Okay.
But also because I didn't understand why I'd miscarried, and I thought if I went back to fasting, then my body would kick into healing mode, and it would help. And when I say fasting, I'm talking drinking broth, soups, and meats that are cooked in broths and soups. So very digestible food. Yeah.
How was the impact of the fast after such an emotional experience for you? Do you recommend it? Was it good for you?
Yeah, I recommend it. It didn't stop the weight gain, which was very depressing, but it definitely it's very anti-inflammatory, and it's emotionally very stabilizing as well. Yeah.
That's funny, because I know whenever I've gone through rough times, I've naturally done that.
Yeah,
that's all I want to have is like soups, broths, meats.
Yep. And egg yolks. Egg yolks. I was just piling to egg yolks. But it was a good experience, but it also showed me very clearly that there was something obviously wrong with my thyroid. I thought hormonally the miscarriage had knocked me out of whack. Anyway, so I recovered emotionally from the miscarriage as you do over a period of time. I kept on with gaps, and we kept trying to get pregnant. And what kept happening was I would fall pregnant, and then 3 days later I would get my period. So we had we were doing the tests, and about 4 or 5 times over the course of a year I would have a positive pregnancy test.
Wow,
and then,
that's stressful.
It was very, very stressful. They refer to them as chemical pregnancies. And so then I started thinking, well, what on earth is going wrong with my body? I've always found it very easy to fall pregnant. I've been very fertile my whole life. It was, with all my health issues, that was one thing that was not an issue. And I thought, well, is it just because I'm older? And perhaps it was. So this is a very anecdotal story. But eventually, after about 9 months, I went to the doctor and my lovely GP, and I said, you need to test me for everything, because I don't feel good, and I'm getting more and more depressed why I can't fall pregnant. I can't keep going through these chemical pregnancies, and we wanted to stop trying. We decided we were going to give up. But I thought we'll just do all the tests and see if anything comes up. And one thing came up in the blood test, and that was my ferritin levels were really high. And that means that your body is storing iron. Now, I knew that I didn't have that disease, which is called
hemochromatosis.
Hemochromatosis, thank you very much, Joe. I did not have hemochromatosis. And weirdly, because my cousin had hemochromatosis, and he told us about 3 months earlier, and that we all had to go and get tested for hemochromatosis. And I'd just done a genetic test for hemochromatosis. So it was weird. The timing was weird. So anyway, my ferritin levels were high, but I didn't have hemochromatosis. So the doctor didn't really know what to do with that, but I was like, oh, give me information. I'll go and study up and find out why this is happening. And the thing that came up straight away when I looked into new research is that if you have a bacterial infection, your body stores iron. But I didn't have a bacterial infection. We'd tested for that. But then there was a new study which linked having a parasitic infection with high ferritin as well. Now, this was new science. My doctor had never heard of this. So I went back to him armed with this white paper, and I said, I think I've got parasites. Can you do a stool test? Just the microbiology stool test that you do. And he was like, you don't have parasites. I'm like, but maybe I do. And maybe they're somehow interfering with my hormones. So I latched onto this as the root cause of my fertility issues. Anyway, so I went and did the stool test, and he phoned me, and he was so excited because they'd found 2 parasites. And he was like, I'm so excited. You've got parasites. I was like, this is awesome. Okay, it wasn't awesome. It was awesome.
It was exciting because it was new to him.
Yeah, it was new to him, and it was new to me as well. And I was excited because I'd said to him, I bet you I have parasites. And he was like, no way. Anyway, so it was like a ha-ha, I told you so kind of a moment for me.
Mary, how much did the test cost?
Oh, this one was free. So this was just the microbiology test where they go and test you for I think it's 5 different types of parasites. And I was lucky that it actually came up. The microbiology tests are not always so good. You can have parasites and they don't come up in that test. The really, really good one is called a PCR test. But it does cost like $400 or something. And
is that through a GP?
I think so. I think you can get it through a GP or you get it through a biomedical doctor or a naturopath or someone like that.
Okay.
But they come back with details of not just parasites, but bacteria and yeast and all that kind of stuff. So good tests, but we've always avoided tests because we thought, well, it's not going to change what we do. We're going to do gaps.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. So we'd save our money. But this microbiology test was so helpful. And it came back that I had blastocystis hominis and Dientamoeba fragilis. And so funny, my doctor, then he looks at this and he goes, but everyone says that blastocystis hominis is a asymptomatic parasite.
I don't think everyone says it, but I think
No.
everyone who can pronounce it says it.
Yeah, I call it blasto. That's
Right.
Blasto. That sounds good.
You got to break it down into rap. It's like defrag and blasto. Yeah. But he also, my doctor's really funny. He'll do anything I ask of him, and he's learning so much from our journey. But he always expresses his cynicism before we do anything. So he will say to me, I think Candida is a problem. And he goes, the medical world is very skeptical about Candida causing health issues. And he said the same thing about blasto. He said, the medical world is very skeptical. They think it's asymptomatic. But I think this goes back to what Fuad said earlier, is that in a healthy gut, blasto is probably a very helpful parasite. But in a gut that has imbalance, dysbiosis, and leaks in it, blasto is becoming more and more recognized as causing some hectic symptoms in people, and D. fragilis as well. So off I went with my little parasite diagnosis. I'm pregnant. You can tell I keep forgetting words.
You're doing pretty good. I mean, you remembered those parasite names.
I can remember that, but I can't remember the word diagnosis. But so off I went, and I developed myself a little parasite protocol. I actually I wrote it out, and I thought, this I can manage. And it was from everything that I'd learned from Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride and the frequently asked questions and anything anyone had ever mentioned on the GAPS forums I followed, I developed it. And the rules were you need to take diatomaceous earth, and you need to take it for at least 6 months to break the parasite cycles.
What's that? Take what?
It's called diatomaceous earth, or DE. And people use it to keep, they use it externally to keep parasites off chickens, to keep ants out of the house. But there's a food grade, it's a food grade silica, which is very safe to take internally. But it takes, I think what they say is it cuts the exoskeleton of parasites as it goes through the gut.
Interesting.
And where do you get it from?
I buy it online from diatomaceousearthonline.com.
All right.
You've just got to figure out how to spell it first.
You really do. Don't ask me to do that. Okay.
Those who are going to order it will know how to spell it.
That's it.
That's right.
Actually, if you start typing, autocorrect will come up and tell you.
That's
good. So that was the first thing that I figured out. The second thing was that garlic is critical in getting rid of parasites, whether it's raw garlic and then in the later stages fermented garlic. Then there are other herbs which are very well known, like wormwood and ground cloves and black walnut hull. But my son was anaphylactic to walnuts, so we never went down the black walnut hull road. And then there was also a very good article which I read, which said that parasites like to feed on yeast. So I got it in my head that it would be a good idea to take a non-toxic antifungal in the beginning to get rid of yeast called nystatin, and to start the parasite protocol using nystatin. In the middle of all of this, I decided to get the kids tested as well. And not only, my poor children, did they have blasto and defrag, but they had giardia as well. And so then we were like, all the pennies dropped into place, and we were like, oh, Stuart's giardia, and then Stu went and got tested, and what do you know, he had the same things, and we started to think that this was the final piece in our puzzle for healing. Anyway, so I went and treated myself, and after the first month, it must have been about 5 weeks, of being on the DE, the nystatin, and garlic, and going through every 2 weeks changing up what you were taking. So you take garlic for the first week, and then cloves, and then wormwood, and because the parasites get used to it.
So okay, so you'd swap it each week.
Yeah. I fell pregnant, and I am now 31 weeks pregnant.
Yay! That's so exciting.
So I don't care what anyone says. It was parasites. And I went back to my doctor, and he was amazed and couldn't believe it. And we tested, and I told him all the kids' symptoms. Like my little daughter also still was getting the bloated tummy. And so we put them on the parasite protocol, and every symptom I listed earlier is now resolved.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's also antibacterial, the stuff that you're taking as well, right?
Some of it. The garlic is quite antibacterial, but coconut oil is antifungal. The oregano oil is the one that's really antibacterial, and we decided not to use it for that reason. Because we felt that we could get there without it. Another one that people will use is olive leaf extract.
Yeah.
Right.
That's also antibacterial. So we've avoided the last two, oregano oil and olive leaf extract.
And was that just because you didn't want major die-off?
Yeah, and because we had a bad experience with it, and so we thought, well,
we'll do it more gently.
Yeah, we do it more gently, and if we need to do it at the end, we will. And in fact, fermented garlic, we've hardly been able to take any fermented garlic because the diet's pretty full on.
How long has it been now? So what, 9 months ish?
Yeah. So I suppose it's been 8 months since I did the parasite protocol, and the kids' behaviour over full moon is now 100% fine.
Wow.
But most importantly, the itchy bums have gone away. There's no more nail biting. There's no more toe walking. There's no more random behavioural meltdowns.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been amazing.
There was a recent episode of a podcast that I love out of the States called Brady Lab. And I don't know if either of you ladies listen to it, but it's just one of the world's best podcasts, really. And
listen to it.
It's really, really great. Really, like they're beautiful storytellers. But on one of the most recent episodes, they talk about antibiotic resistance and how these two women in the UK. One is a biochemist who's also like a history buff. She has a friend who is a historian who's a biochemistry buff, and they basically went through the textbooks and found some old recipes that, an old recipe from one of the famous books of the time. And it gave this recipe to heal everything, basically. That's what the recipe was meant to do. And and it had a lot of herbs in it, and one of the things in it was the garlic and the onion that they put there and ferment. Yeah. And they use it. They've been using it to do that. So the women did that, and they followed the recipe as it was, and they sent it to labs that test for antibiotic-resistant bacterial strains. Yeah. So these are MRSA.
This is familiar. I've heard of this. Yeah.
And they basically wiped it out. MRSA, which is like we can't treat it. We don't actually have antibiotics that can kill it, and it's just absolutely amazing, and it's great to see that we still have some of that wisdom today. Well,
it disappeared and it's coming back, I'd say.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But I'm interested why you said you couldn't manage the fermented garlic.
Well, we've never managed ferment well in our family. Even on GAPS, we've had to go very, very slowly with fermented food, mainly because we have a gene mutation called MTHFR, which means we have methylation issues. I don't really understand it very much, and I should probably know more about it. But one thing I do know is that for myself personally, because I had chronic fatigue syndrome, my lymphatic system collapsed, and the ferments push a detox that is quite heavy, and my glands swell up, and I get brain fog. And after 2 years on GAPS, that is moving a lot better, but it's still a bit sluggish if I go too hard on the fermented foods. And one of the most potent, powerful fermented foods you can have is garlic, fermented garlic, because it's anti-parasitic, it's antibiotic. But what we do is we ferment the garlic. You have to ferment it for at least a month, was a lesson I learned. And then the liquid that has fermented the garlic, we use that, we put drops of that into the kids' broth. But if I ever go too fast with it, I notice that my son will get the leg pains at night. And
so you put it in a hot liquid?
In a warm broth.
Yeah. And so it obviously, fermentation will create a bacterial culture. Yeah. So do you think what's helpful about it is the bacteria itself or some kind of compound that gets created?
Gosh, Fuad, that's a really good question. Because we ferment lots of foods. We ferment lots of vegetables and lots of cabbage, but nothing is as powerful as fermented garlic. So there's something in the garlic that when it is fermented just becomes more anti-parasitic and more antibacterial. But certainly the probiotic value of it, maybe it is that even garlic unfermented is a very powerful healing mechanism. Like I remember I used to just eat, if I felt like I was getting sick, I would just eat raw cloves. And so maybe that all of those powerful properties with the probiotic is just like a superfood. Yeah.
Well, one thing that's really interesting about garlic and its properties is those antibacterial properties in it. They don't last through cooking. So if you actually try to cook with it, it'll lose. If you chop it fresh and use it fresh and in cooking, it'll lose the antibacterial properties. But if you leave it sitting aside for 20 minutes or so, they will be able to last through the cooking. So you'll be able to use it and get the benefit of the garlic.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't actually know that. That's brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting to me is maybe that extended fermentation, which is oxidization for the garlic itself, and maybe it's doing something to stabilize those really potent antibacterial molecules that are in it, and then maybe it becomes so concentrated in it after like a month's worth of exposure to oxygen or whatever it is that the process that it undergoes, that it makes it much more, I guess, effective.
Well, yeah, actually this rings a bell now that you mentioned it. The cutting of the garlic and leaving it aside releases enzymes in it that start to work. It's a bit like juicing. When you juice things, the enzymes are protected. And it's the same with the garlic and the onion. When we put the onion rings on our children's feet at night if they've got chest colds, you cut it, you leave it for 10 minutes, and then you put it on their feet. So it obviously releases an enzyme, but it would be really interesting. It's probably, you'd find that it triggers the villi in the gut lining to release an enzyme of their own that in combination they work together to fight these diseases or these... Yeah. It's fascinating.
So can I just ask, how do you ferment garlic?
So you peel just thousands and thousands of garlic.
She says with tears.
I did a cooking class once and I got everyone in my cooking class to peel my garlic for me.
Oh, good idea.
And then I wouldn't share it with them. I picked it all.
Mary, very easy tip. You just put it in 2 stainless steel bowls that are basically closing it together, and then you shake it for like a minute. And then when you open the bowls up, it's all peeled. You can have 50 cloves in there. And they're
isn't that brilliant?
Yeah.
Spoken like a Lebanese chef.
I know. I'm so grateful for you right now.
Garlic.
So what I did with the peeled garlic, and now it'll be so much quicker, but you just put it in a fermenting jar.
So whole?
Yeah, I didn't cut them at all. I just peeled them. And then put them... Although I must say, I wonder if this goes back to us talking about releasing those enzymes when you cut it. I cut the tips off them to peel them. And maybe that would have released the enzymes. Oh, yeah, you're probably right.
If it matters if they are peeled, because I peel my garlic in the Thermomix and it gets slightly chopped.
Yeah, and that would go back to what Fuad said about just cutting them and leaving them. So I would say, based on what we've just discussed now, that it would be wise to cut them a little bit, even if you just slit them, with a knife. Yeah.
Can't hurt.
Yeah, it can't hurt. Yeah, exactly. Then you cover them. So then you put and I've heard that you can just put Himalayan rock salt and water in and cover them, and then leave them to ferment. I used a starter. I used whey from my yogurt to start them. You can use a vegetable starter. You can buy a starter culture and add that to the water and cover them. And then you leave them for a month. That's the most important part.
Well, that's interesting. I'll have to try that.
Oh, so something else we've discovered is my son and I get what we used to get cold sores. And if you dip if you dip even just an earbud into some of that garlic liquid, fermented garlic liquid, and put it on when you feel a cold sore's coming, they don't come.
Wow.
They stop them in the tracks.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Why do we not know this stuff?
I know.
I'm sure our great-great-grandmothers knew it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. The other thing that we did was when there was an inner ear infection, how the child's screaming because their ear is so sore, but it hasn't burst the eardrum or anything. You can literally lie the child on their side and put drops of that garlic liquid into their ear.
So I've always heard garlic oil, but I'd say this is a lot more potent.
So we use also onion, literally squeeze onions, and the liquid from the onions goes in the ear, or the fermented garlic goes in the ear, and it sorts it out.
Wow.
Sounds like a deconstructed kimchi. If you add some sauerkraut.
Yeah. I like that. So chefy.
Yeah. Now, have you got any more questions to ask, Fuad? Because I've got a couple.
I'll keep going for like 3 years, but I'll give it to you. All right. Sorry.
No, I'm kidding. So, one of the questions I was asked is, can you get rid of parasites completely, or do you just tone them down? But I think you've pretty much answered that it's normal to have some in there.
Yeah. Your goal has to not be getting rid of parasites. It has to be healing your gut.
Yes.
And when you heal your gut and your villi come back and your gut is healed and sealed and your microbiome is all balanced, the parasites will naturally balance out within that microbiome.
Okay. And the other thing, what kind of foods are going to help to not feed the parasites? Pretty much a GAPS diet.
Yeah, it's a GAPS diet. So take out the starches and the grains and the sugars, and whole, everything whole foods, organic. But lots of broths and fats and meats. They don't like that at all.
Okay.
Soups. And then what you often find is people who are toxic have parasites, and the toxic people need a lot more vegetables.
So what do you mean people who are toxic?
When I say toxic, I think you get two types of people when they have damaged gut microbiome. You get the type who react to foods, allergic people, irritable bowel syndrome people, and then you get the other people whose symptoms are not so digestive, but they have thyroid issues, rheumatoid arthritis issues, depression, anxiety, ADHD, autism, those symptoms, which are far more...
And the last podcast I did was with a lady whose son was very toxic, and he had all the autism symptoms.
Yeah, that's it. And often fibromyalgia, so aches, inflamed joints, but not necessarily the symptoms that are in the gut. And those people tend to be struggling with toxicity, which causes so many of those symptoms. And to deal with toxicity, you need to get the toxins out of your body. You need to open up your detox pathways, and you need to stop reintroducing toxins into your body. So the way to do that is generally through lots and lots of organic vegetables and some fruits which have detoxing agents in them, but you don't want to feed the bad bacteria at the
So
same
what
time.
fruits are good for detoxing?
Lemons are brilliant. Citrus in general is excellent. Seasonal fruits are very good. Berries are very, very good for detoxing. Yeah. The ones that feed the bacteria more are bananas, but they're full of good potassium and magnesium. So it's a balancing act. You have to have that fruit in your diet, but don't eat a whole banana. Just have a few slices of banana.
To tell my son that I have to stop him from eating 6 a day.
I know, my poor son, he came home from school today and he complained because I put one slice of banana and that's his treat for the day. And he's like, it's not fair. So I said, all right, I'll try and do better. Yeah. It's taking it to a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Shame. So toxicity is more vegetables, but I think the parasites really hate the fat in the broth.
Okay. It's interesting. So feeling sick in your stomach all the time, is that a sign of parasites, do you think?
Yes, I'd say definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
So digestive signs of parasites are diarrhea, bloated tummies, nausea and vomiting, dark rings under the eyes, solid tummy, inflammation in the gut.
Okay.
Hives as well.
Hives.
Often, hives can be a sign of parasites. Not the first sign you would look for, but certainly many people report hives.
Yeah.
But also, people need to be careful that there are signs of other things.
Yes, exactly.
And not to jump to the conclusion that they have the parasites. But I think the pathway that people need to follow is to try to regain health through the diet, as you were saying, Mary, and before they start going into the territory of trying to treat one thing, which is the parasite or the bacteria or whatever it is. So
but do remember that you can always go and get a free test to see if you've got parasites.
Yes.
And once you have that information, it doesn't mean you should straight away go after the parasites. It's exactly what you said. You should probably...
Had you known, would you have added those parasitic foods into your diet early on in your GAPS journey, or would you have just delayed it until you've healed your gut and then added the anti-parasitic?
It's a good question for it. I think if we had known, we probably would have brought them in earlier, and it probably would have done harm. Because our body, too much too soon, because our bodies weren't ready to treat parasites. So for us, it all worked out perfectly.
And also, for whoever doesn't know the start of your story, how slowly you had to do GAPS. It was like one drop of broth in your son's bottle, slowly increasing it to half a bottle in 3 months.
We couldn't have
it
treated
was really slow.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
A very, very fragile, sensitive child. So if we had tried to treat parasites earlier in his journey in particular, it would have made him very sick.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe people who are rather healthy and don't have extreme health issues, and they are going on GAPS just to get themselves to a really good baseline, could have these foods earlier on.
Yes,
and see how they react. But if they are in extreme cases such as your child's, it's probably a good idea just to stick to GAPS as it is, and then later on introduce these foods as in small doses and build up the tolerance.
Absolutely, and actually she speaks to that in her frequently asked questions. Dr. McBride, she says that you should only treat parasites after you've been on GAPS for 8 months and you feel like your healing has plateaued or you aren't healing as fast as you would like. Then you should go after parasites. So she gives an actual timeline of 8 months. We did it after 18 months, or probably more like after 15 months, because that was just our journey. Yeah.
All right, so the listeners out there, don't do your test until 8 months after your GAPS journey, and then see how you go.
But then again, I say that I know many people who've done it at 6 months with great results. So
it depends how fast you're healing, I suppose, doesn't it?
You need to know your own body and
another question for you. So this is from a guy who's got parasites and doing the antibiotic treatments and stuff and still having major troubles. He's always feeling sick in his stomach, obviously weak in body, especially in the morning. Goes for ages without eating because it makes him feel sick, but then skipping food makes him feel worse. So he tries to eat little bits all the time, but it's very hard. He can take up to 30 minutes to eat one meal and sometimes throws up his breakfast. And so would you just start with the broths and the meat, like you said, and just really that's all you can do?
I would start on the intro diet, and it's very gentle in the beginning, and he might struggle with it, but he might also find that
it's easier.
I would say it would be easier on his gut. It certainly would be very anti-inflammatory, and it sounds like he's very inflamed. But I would also suggest that to feel that sick after eating, that his gallbladder is not functioning properly. It's not producing enough stomach acid, and he will need to read through what it says on GAP's intro about stomach acid. Ox bile is a supplement you can take to help with that in the first month.
Yeah.
And foods like lemon in water first thing in the morning, apple cider vinegar in water, just things to stimulate that gallbladder to create more stomach acid.
So that's what the lemon water does.
Yeah, it does. Okay. And sauerkraut does it as well, but I would suggest he hold off the ferments until he's way into that intro diet. Just settle that stomach.
The extra acidity is really good for people with acid reflux because they have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth as well, and then you add those acids in there, and they really, really help control the bacterial population, which is in the wrong part of your body.
Exactly.
So it has a lot of different effects as well on your body. One of them is that, and once those symptoms start subsiding, then eating becomes an easier task for you as well.
Yes, and it's very difficult, and slowly, isn't it? You have to wait until the body kicks itself into gear. Fasting does that, and then, like Fuad says, the apple cider vinegars, those stimulant foods, help to sterilize the stomach, for example, so that it doesn't have bacteria in the stomach. And it's hard, though. Yeah.
What do you think of the bowel flush idea that they do for getting rid of parasites?
I actually think there's a lot of value in it.
Okay.
I don't think too often, and I don't think for a healthy person it's necessarily valuable.
But for someone who's having a really bad time with it, it's an option.
Oh, absolutely. It really helps because a lot of the probiotic foods that you eat don't get down into the lower colon. For example, just from the acids in the tummy and all the way through. So sometimes you have to attack it from the other end, as it were. And you can do bowel flushes where you have probiotic. Like you can put fermented garlic juice into an enema kit and do enemas.
Do that kind of thing,
to get the probiotics. But because it doesn't go through the digestive tract, it doesn't.
It's probably better than eating it, Joe. To be honest.
Probably.
You wouldn't have the huge die-off, and
you wouldn't have bad breath. No.
You just have bad farts. So I had to go there. Garlic farts. But
it's okay. We'll edit that one out.
No, let's leave it. She always says something embarrassing.
I know, and my friends always
good fun.
told me the next day, how could you have said that? But anyway, so there's especially for people with toxicity issues, regular coffee enemas are recommended because it goes, it doesn't go through the digestive tract, but it goes to the liver and pulls toxins out of the liver.
Interesting, isn't it?
Colonics, I think, are for people with parasites and bad bacteria are a very useful tool.
Okay. I wondered about that because I've heard something about, it kind of strips the colon, I suppose, of good and bad, so maybe it's not a good thing. But I guess then you've got to work on repopulating it with... Is that right?
Yeah. I think that's why I would say, like, colonic irrigation I wouldn't do frequently. I would do it... I wouldn't do it more than once a month.
No.
But enemas I would do regularly if you're trying to get rid of parasites. I would do one every 36 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've always been really kind of cautious of these things. Never really had the courage to try them. And once every 36 hours sounds like what? Like
full on.
Is that
it is full
is
on.
that normal? Like of like.
Well, I'll tell you what the 36 hours.
Things, go on. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. When we started GAPS, I was told by people who'd done it before that I would need to get an enema kit and that we would need to do enemas. And I was like, that is not happening. It's just not happening. I was not interested. But on intro in particular, a very common symptom, because you've taken all the fiber out of the diet, is quite severe constipation. And if you're constipated and detoxing at the same time, that's
not good.
Yeah, you just start retoxing. And so the recommendation was to use enemas to get the toxic stuff out. And we did it on all four of us. And oh my goodness, you just saw the difference. You saw the color literally flood back into the children's faces.
I remember that with the colonics, because when I was a teenager, we had them, and the skin was different.
Yeah,
on your face.
it does. You go from pasty to
To,
itchy.
yeah, red cheeks.
And it's again, if you're a healthy person, you don't need to do this. But if you have the issue, and it's helping, and your color is coming back, and you a lot of the time you're pulling dead parasites out of the lower end of the colon, which are just could get septic. They could retox you as well, and so to get they get trapped in the gut lining at the bottom. To get that stuff out can only benefit you, but it is something to get your head around. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's what it is, isn't it?
Yeah,
Especially with kids.
Oh, shame, my poor children. Oh, yeah.
One more question I thought of. If you could just mention a few. For people that have had to have the antibiotic treatment and it's been, the full-on big proper treatment for parasites, what do you do afterwards? Like, I think they give you some kind of probiotic treatment, but I don't know how good it is. Do you know what's the best thing for them to do afterwards?
I would say even during. So if you're doing the antibiotic treatment at the moment, then every 2 hours after you take the antibiotics, take a really broad spectrum probiotic.
Have you got a suggestion?
BioCult is the one I would suggest, or custom probiotics. They have 11 to 12 strains of good bacteria in them. And it's not that they will survive the antibiotic treatment, it's that between the antibiotics, they will keep the candida in check. Okay. And then you'll take an antibiotic and it'll kill the probiotics again, but then 2 hours later you'll take probiotics again and they will keep the candida in check.
Okay.
So that's just a way of keeping it in check so that at the end of the antibiotic treatment, you can go really, really hard on really good, broad-spectrum, expensive probiotics and probiotic foods, kefir, yogurt, sauerkraut, all of those foods, anything that you can get your hands on, you just want to pump it after you've been on the antibiotics.
And what's the really expensive probiotics, dare I ask?
Well, yeah. Well, so like a box of BioCult will cost you $60.
Okay.
Then there's a tiny little tub of a probiotic called Gut Pro, which costs $120.
Heard of that one?
Yeah, but it lasts much longer than the BioCult. So you only take like you take 1/36 of a teaspoon or something ridiculous. Yeah.
Are they soil-based bacteria, or are they like the transient style, like lactobacillus and that kind of type of bacteria?
They're a mixture. They're mostly the transitory bacteria, but they do have some soil bacteria in there. They have plantarum and they have rhamnosus, which is very good for inflammation and for allergies. So basically these probiotics, the reason you want to take the commercial probiotics as well as eat the fermented foods is that the commercial probiotics have the bacteria that is missing from our world.
Soil and stuff.
Yeah. We used to get that from
naturally.
The wells,
food.
Yeah. Pulling our water out of wells. That's what, and our food has been stripped of all these bacteria. So this reintroduces that variety. And then the fermented foods introduce the volume because you will get much more probiotic in a spoonful of sauerkraut than you will in a tablet of BioCult, but you won't get the variety in the sauerkraut that you'll get in so you need both.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Oh, I've learnt lots.
That's great.
Yeah. Have you got any more questions, Fuad?
No, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much, Mary.
Yeah,
no, it's a pleasure. Yeah,
really interesting. So, if people want to know about your what you did, you've got a little ebook or something, I think, on your website.
Yeah, so on www.goodmoodfood.net.au, there is I think it's under resources. There's a parasite treatment plan under there. And there's also, I wrote a blog about parasites. It's Parasites, the Hidden Menace.
Which I think to that.
Yeah. So those two things will be very helpful if you are treating and wondering.
Okay, that's really good. Well, thank you for that. We've gone an hour, so I suppose we better stop. We could talk all night, probably.
I know, always, yeah.
But thank you so much, and I really hope that that's helped those of you who are listening in and wanting some help. It sounds like at least there's things that you can do, and it's not just antibiotics, which a lot of people feel like that's what it is. So it's good to know about the diet side of things as well and the natural side of things. So thank you for that. Okay, so if anyone has any questions, I'm sure Mary would be happy to maybe Sudden influx of questions.
Always happy to answer questions.
Oh, good. Okay. So you can go on her Facebook page, Good Mood Food, or onto her website. So that's a great place to go to contact her. And feel free to leave questions on my Facebook page or in my chat group, Quirky Cooking chat group, and also on the www.thewellnesscouch.com/A Quirky Journey. And you can go onto the Wellness Couch also and view the entire range of wellness podcasts available. There's a lot on there now. And just keep working on those small changes. I know that there's so many things to think about when you're trying to improve your health, but it's all little by little, isn't it? Learning as you go.
It's a journey.
Yeah, it's a journey. And we'll be back to share more journeys with you in a fortnight. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Fuad and Mary, for joining me.
Thanks, Jo.
Okay, bye.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.